Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Saturday night. Good vach, Shavua Tov. Let's light up the darkness. The new wisdom candle. And there's the AC that apparently I left on all through Shabbos, silly me. Who's in the house on a Saturday night? Bill in Mid-Missouri, Joe in the Inland Empire, Joseph in Sierra Nevada, Melissa in Great Neck, New York. Almost midnight. My heroes always on the East Coast. Ella in Southern California. Aoife in Florida. Welcome, everybody. We'll post this on the Facebook page. Definitely a tricky schedule this week with Guns N' Moses opening. 500 theaters, including some here in Southern California, where Nina and I will be appearing to do Q&As. And that's forcing us to make a little bit of a schedule change. I don't want to miss any days this week, but we won't be able to do a regular time. So tomorrow, Sunday and Monday, we'll do the Friday schedule of noon Pacific. So Sunday and Monday. Tuesday, I'm not sure about. Wednesday, I'm not sure about yet. Thursday, for sure, is going to be Friday schedule. So this coming week, at very least, Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday will be all at noon Pacific. And we'll announce what's happening with Tuesday and Wednesday as soon as we figure it out. But for sure, tomorrow and Monday, noon Pacific for AT Daily. Okay. Our daf tonight is page 4 here in Tractate Horayos, the 28th volume of the Talmud, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 2. In chapter 1, we're talking about when the court issues an erroneous ruling and people rely on it. If a majority of the people rely on it and it was a ruling worded such that you can do this thing, which was actually a prohibited thing, but the court issued this mistaken ruling and said you could do it, then, if enough people have done it and it was worded the right way, and all of the judges participated in the ruling, then they bring this special offering, the bull, for an erroneous ruling that caused all the people to commit an unwitting sin. We've seen there's a dispute as to whether the people have to bring an offering for an unwitting sin, on an individual basis in this situation. And we're examining lots of other nuances about it. We're on page 4, fairly near the top of 4a. The Mishna teaches that Ben Azai said to Rabbi Akiva, okay, and so then this idea here in Mishnah number 2, it's Mishnah 2, right? Yeah, Mishnah 2, that what happens if the court issued an erroneous ruling, And then the court realized that they made a mistake and they corrected themselves. They publicized that they made an erroneous ruling. What if a person didn't hear about it and he continues to rely on the erroneous ruling and commits this, what is actually a transgression, thinking that it's permitted? And so basically the question is, should he have known better? Okay, he didn't hear that, he heard that the court issued the first ruling, relied on it, didn't hear that they issued a reversal of their ruling. So now, is he exempt the way he might have been when he was relying on the court's erroneous ruling, now that the court has published that it was an error? So the Mishna teaches that Ben Azai said to Rabbi Akiva, in what way is this person who went overseas different from one who sits in his house? Because in our Mishnah it said, one who went overseas, he had no chance to hear that the court had reversed its position. So if he relied on that ruling, he's exempt from bringing a sin offering. But one who was just sitting in his house, if he had been more in touch with community affairs, he would have heard that the ruling had been reversed. And so he is not exempt, right? He's liable to bring a sin offering because he can't rely on the court's ruling. Again, it's not like liable to pay huge fines, liable to go to jail, something like that. Liable in this case means that he gets to make an atonement by bringing an offering in the Holy Temple. But he is chayav to do that, right? He needs to do that. He doesn't have that exemption from doing that he would have if he had been overseas. So now they're saying, well, why is this so different, being overseas and being at home? In either case, not being aware that the court had reversed its ruling. All right, so the Mishnah teaches that Ben Azai said to Rabbi Akiva, in what way is this person who went overseas different from one who sits in his house? And Rabbi Akiva said to him, the difference is that with regard to the one who sits in his house, it would have been possible for him to hear the court's reversal. But with regard to the person who went overseas, it would not have been possible for him to hear of the court's reversal. Seems like a pretty straightforward, obvious answer to the question. So the Gemara asks, Rabbi Akiva said well to Ben Azai. But how did a scholar of the caliber of Ben Azai fail to understand that distinction? Why did he question it? And Rava said the reference is not to one who already went to a country overseas. Rather, it is in the case of one who set out on the way, but has not yet left his city, in which there is a practical difference between them. According to Ben Azai, he is liable, as it is in his home city where he is located at this time, and there is no difference between him and one who is sitting in his house. But according to Rabbi Akiva, he is exempt, as he has already set out on the way. Even though he is still in his home city, he is preoccupied with his travels, and his status is like one who has already gone overseas. Pretty interesting idea metaphorically, right? This person who has set out on a journey, and he's still quite close to his home, but he's in vacation mind, right? He is in travel mind, road trip mind. And he's already left this city behind, even though he's still in it. How many times have we been that person, whether it's because we embarked on an actual journey or because, we're just somewhere else when we should be right here. New subject. The Mishnah teaches, in a case where the judges of the court issued an erroneous ruling to abolish the entire essence of the mitzvah, this is not a valid ruling and the court is exempt from bringing an offering. Right? So somehow a court, right, a court of sages, a court of judges, which in ancient times, this is not just rabbis, but these is, revered, august, super high level rabbis with tremendous Torah education, and somehow they issued a ruling which violates the most fundamental and simple precepts of the Torah. Like they said something like, there is no Shabbos. You could do any work you want on the seventh day of the week. Now, that's such a ridiculous ruling that we don't even call that a ruling. So if they did something like that and people relied on it, then we have to wonder what insanity passed through the Jewish people that the court would issue such a ruling and that people should rely on it. But what we're not going to do is use the mechanism of the erroneous ruling where a matter was hidden from them, that they made a mistake in their deliberations and ended up in a place permitting something that was actually forbidden. This is so obviously forbidden that if they permitted it, some weirdness was going on, and it doesn't put us in the realm of using the special offering or the other rules here. This is just something else entirely, and that's why we would say that the judges are exempt from bringing the bull offering, because we're going to have to deal with this with some other mechanism than the bull offering of the erroneous ruling. The sages taught, the verse states, and the matter is hidden from the eyes of the congregation in Leviticus 4:13. Now from this it is derived that there is liability for this special offering only when a single matter is hidden from, a single part of a mitzvah, but not in the case where they abolish the entire mitzvah. How so? If the court said there is no prohibition against engaging in intercourse with a menstruating woman written in the Torah, right? Well, obviously it is written in the Torah. Or there is no prohibition against performing prohibited labor on Shabbos written in the Torah. There is no prohibition against engaging in idol worship written in the Torah. One might have thought that the judges would be liable. But because this is so obviously wrong, therefore the verse states, and the matter is hidden. And not that the entire mitzvah will be hidden. It's not hidden. It's obviously spelled out in the Torah. So accordingly, if the judges issued that ruling, they're exempt from bringing an offering. They'll get fired, they might get punished in other ways, but this particular mitzvah won't be applying. But if the judges said, there is a prohibition against engaging in intercourse with a menstruating woman written in the Torah, but one who engages in intercourse with a woman who observes a clean day for a day she experiences a discharge is exempt, or if they said there is a prohibition against performing prohibited labor on Shabbos written in the Torah, but one who carries out objects from the private domain to the public domain is exempt, or if they said there is a prohibition against engaging in idol worship written in the Torah, but one who bows to the idol but did not sacrifice an offering is exempt, one might have thought that the judges would be exempt because they abolished something that was very obvious. It's still only part of the mitzvah. They acknowledge that you can't do prohibited labor on Shabbos. But to say you can carry from a private domain to a public domain, in the absence of an Erev, this is such an obvious teaching that even though it's part of a mitzvah, maybe this would, they would be exempt for the same reason as abolishing the whole mitzvah. Therefore, the verse states, and the matter is hidden, from which it is derived that there is liability only for a matter, a single detail, but not for the entire essence. So in this case, since they ruled to abolish only a detail of the mitzvah, the judges would be liable under the mechanism that we're talking about here, the bull offering brought for the erroneous ruling. Now, the Gemara analyzes the latter clause of the Baraisa. The master said, this Baraisa that we were bringing in yesterday, and that Baraisa, right, which is all about this idea that, does when the court makes an erroneous ruling, our Mishna said that an individual who relies on that ruling is exempt from bringing the individual sin offering. But what if there was uncertainty? Then he might have to, and there might be the provisional guilt offering. These were the general terms of the Baraisa we were talking about at the end of yesterday. So the master said one might have thought that the judges would be exempt. And the Gemara asked, but if in a case of sustaining a portion of the mitzvah and nullifying a portion of the mitzvah, the judges are exempt, and in a case of abolishing the entire essence of the mitzvah, the judges are exempt, as explained in the first clause of the Baraisa, in what case would they be liable? And the Gemara answers, this is what is difficult for the Tana. Say that the term matter is referring to the entire matter, and the judges are liable even if they rule to abolish the entire mitzvah. Therefore, the verse states, and the matter is hidden. So the Gemara asks, well, from where is this inferred? And Ula said, read into the verse as though the letter mem, the last letter in the word venalam, is also appended to the beginning of the word devar, and this results in the phrase venelam midavar, meaning part of the matter is hidden, from which it is derived that there is liability for nullification of part of the matter and not for abolishing the entire matter. So Chizkiah said that the verse states, and they performed one of all the mitzvahs, from which it is inferred that one is liable for nullification for a portion of all the mitzvahs and not for nullification of every mitzvah. So according to this, when we're talking about that, the mechanism of the erroneous offering only applies, right, when we said that they nullify some portion of a mitzvah. Here they're saying, well, what if what it actually means is if they nullify any of the mitzvahs, they would be liable, but they would be exempt. They wouldn't use this mechanism if these judges came and said there is no Torah, right? Because they're nullifying all the mitzvahs. So as long as they're not nullifying all the mitzvahs, maybe they use this mechanism. So the Gemara asks, the term mitzvah is plural, mitzvot or mitzvahs, which indicates at least two. If that is the source, there should be liability, even if the judges issue a ruling abolishing the entire essence of one mitzvah, as one mitzvah is a portion of two mitzvahs. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, although the word is vocalized in the plural as mitzvahs or mitzvot, the word mitzvat is written without a second vav as though it were in the singular. So Rav Ashi said, the Tana derives a verbal analogy, learning the meaning of the term matter, written in the context of the erroneous ruling from the term matter, devar, written in the context of the rebellious elder. As it is written with regard to the rebellious elder, if there shall be a matter, a devar, that is too hard for you, you shall not turn aside from the matter, hadavar, that they shall declare unto you to the right nor to the left. Deuteronomy 17, verses 8 through 11. So, just as one becomes a rebellious elder, only when his dispute with the sages is with regard to a portion of the matter and not an entire matter, so too, with regard to the erroneous ruling of the court, the error of the judges must be with regard to a portion of the matter and not the entire essence of the matter. In other words, we're all expected to know the basic mitzvahs that are in the Torah. And if the judges come and say that you are not to do, or you are permitted to do something that the Torah explicitly prohibits, then we're not going to rely on such a ruling because it's just clearly erroneous, and that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about here is when the judges come to give us, nuanced answers to difficult problems about how we perform or how, we restrain ourselves from performing an act that would be prohibited, where it's just, a delicate and difficult to understand part of a mitzvah. And that's where they make the mistake, not when they make a mistake with regard to the whole thing. And likewise with the rebellious elder, that's basically a judge who disagrees with his fellow judges, and then he goes and teaches the people that the rest of the judges are wrong and they should follow his ruling. That's what makes him a rebellious elder, and he's chayav misa. That is something that is a death penalty offense. Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says a court is not liable to bring an offering unless it issues an erroneous ruling concerning a matter with which the Sadducees do not agree. So this is another way of explaining that we're talking about not, nullifying an explicit a mitzvah that's explicitly written in the Torah, right? Why would our sages define something that we do or don't do according to the beliefs of the Sadducees? The Sadducees were a group who opposed the sages and the whole concept of the Torah Shebaal Peh, the oral Torah, the oral tradition that stretches all the way back to Mount Sinai. They are people who said that they would only follow the laws that are written expressly in the Torah. And eventually they died out. It did not work out for them. But why would we say anything about them, right? This is the books of the rabbis, right, of our sages. But it's actually a convenient definition because what does it mean? What do the sages do? They only follow the written Torah. And what we're saying is if a judge nullified something that's written in the Torah, that would not qualify for bring the bull offering of the erroneous ruling, etc. We're talking about more nuanced matters that are related to interpretation of laws that are in the Torah. Okay, so that's why they would use this just as a definition. The Sadducees do not accept the oral Torah and they interpret the written Torah literally. The court is liable only for a matter that is not explicitly written in the Torah or that does not clearly stem from that which is written in the Torah. But with regard to an erroneous ruling concerning a matter with which the Sadducees agree, the judges would be exempt, meaning we wouldn't use the bull offering for the erroneous ruling. Then what is the reasoning for this exemption? Because it is a topic that you could go learn in a children's school. Since the matter that the judges ruled upon is so obvious, their ruling simply exhibits ignorance and is not deemed a ruling at all. The Gemara cites proof against the statement of Rav Yehuda, citing Shmuel. We learned in the Mishna, the judges are liable if they said, there is a prohibition against engaging in intercourse with a menstruating woman written in the Torah, but one who engages in intercourse with a woman who observes a clean day for a day that she experiences a discharge is exempt. That's an erroneous ruling in a nuance. And the Gemara asks, and why should they be liable in that case? Like, why would you think that they wouldn't be? And the halacha of a woman, well, now this is the opposite of what we've been saying. Exempt, what do you mean exempt? They should be liable, right? This is what we said, that this is when they make an error on something that is more nuanced, that is on the interpretation of the law that was derived by the sages. Here they made a mistake. These judges made a mistake. But it should be in the realm that we are talking about. It's not written explicitly in the Torah that you can't have relations with a woman who's counting a day for a day when she's no longer menstruating. And so the Gemara asks, and why should they be liable in that case? The law of a woman who observes a day for a day that she experiences a discharge is written in the Torah with regard to a woman who experiences a discharge of blood during the 11-day interval between menstrual periods. It's written. It's not so explicit, but what is written? It's written, and she shall count for herself. And this teaches that she counts one clean day for one day that she experiences a discharge. Since it is written in the Torah, even the Sadducees would agree. And we might argue, how obvious is that to somebody who's just reading the Bible? They're not going to really understand what is being said here. But some would say, no, it is clearly written. And the Gemara answers, the judges did not issue an erroneous ruling with regard to the law of a woman who observes a day for a day. Rather, the Mishna is discussing a case where they said the initial stage of intercourse, known as ha'ara'ah, is permitted with a menstruating woman. Again, this is not permitted. You're not even permitted to touch your wife when she's menstruating. But they're saying that they made a mistake, right, on something that was derived as an interpretation and is not explicitly written in the Torah. So the Gemara says, well, wait a minute, what are you talking about? That law is written in the Torah. In Leviticus 20, verse 18, he has uncovered her fount, he'ara, or he'era, indicating that the first stage of intercourse with a menstruating woman is also prohibited. But that was not written explicitly. You could say that's where we derive it from, but it was not written explicitly. So the Gemara says, rather it is a case where they said intercourse with her in the typical manner is prohibited while she's menstruating, but intercourse in an atypical manner, which is anal intercourse, is permitted. So again, erroneous ruling, but it's not something that was written explicitly in the Torah, so this would trigger liability for the erroneous ruling. And the Gemara asks, but isn't it written? The manners in which one lies with a woman. This is very interesting. Leviticus 18:22. This is actually the prohibition on homosexual intercourse, where it says that a man shall not lie with a man as he would with a woman. And then there's the punishment about it. But it says the lyings of a woman, right? The manners of lying with a woman he shall not do with someone not a woman. And so what they're saying is, because there's an actual plural included in that, he shall not lie with a man as the lyings of a woman, or in the manners that one lies with a woman. There's a plural there. And so this would indicate, well, what are the different ways that one lies with a woman? It would include typical and atypical. And so therefore, it is written in the Torah, and if they made an error of this sort, it would not trigger the mechanism for the bull offering of the erroneous ruling. So the Gemara tries again. Rather, it is a case where they said, with regard to intercourse in a typical manner, even the initial stage of intercourse is forbidden. With regard to intercourse in the atypical manner, it is completion of the act of intercourse that is forbidden, but the initial stage of intercourse is permitted, right? They're trying to drill down to something that is derived by the sages but not written explicitly in the Torah, with the counter argument being, no, it is actually written in the Torah. So here, do we really need to clarify this? But right, the claim would be that the judges ruled that while she's menstruating, you're not permitted to, explicitly says you can't have intercourse with her, but if you did in the atypical manner, it would be permitted. No, but that's explicitly written too because of the definition of intercourse. Well, there's the beginning of intercourse, where you only put it in a little, but not really. And if you did that in the atypical manner versus the typical manner, maybe it's prohibited, and they made a ruling on that, but it's not written explicitly in the Torah, and the counter argument will be, it is written explicitly in the Torah. So the Gemara asks, if so, then even in a case where they issued a ruling permitting the initial stage of intercourse in an atypical manner in the case of a menstruating woman, the judges should also be liable. Why does the Mishna cite the case specifically with regard to a woman who observes a day for a day? The Gemara says, rather, actually, the reference is to a ruling permitting the initial stage of intercourse in a typical manner. And the judges said, in the case of the prohibition of the initial stage of intercourse, it is with regard to an afflicted woman who experienced the discharge of blood during her menstrual period, that it is written, not with regard to one who experiences the discharge during the 11 days between the end of one menstrual period and the expected start of another. And if you wish, say instead that they said a woman assumes the status of a zava, i.e. one who experiences a discharge of blood for 3 consecutive days during those 11 days, only if she experienced the discharge during the day, not at night, as it is written all the days of her discharge, Leviticus 15:26. Again, trying to come up with something that, what is the dividing line between something that is derived by interpretation and something that is kind of explicit in the Torah, where we're saying that if they nullified a law that's explicit in the Torah, they're exempt from bringing this special offering for giving an erroneous ruling. But if they made an error with regard to something that the sages have derived in the past, then they would have this liability. So the Gemara offers proof against the statement of Rabbi Yehuda by citing Shmuel. We learned in the Mishnah, the judges are liable if they said there is a prohibition against performing prohibited labor on Shabbos, written in the Torah, but one who carries out objects from the private domain to the public domain is exempt. And the Gemara asks, and why would they be liable in that case? With regard to carrying out in the public domain, isn't it written, neither carry a burden out of your houses on Shabbos? Is that in the Torah? No. It's in the Tanakh. That's in Jeremiah 17:22. But for that reason, the Sadducees would agree to it. Right? So I guess they could say that if the law maybe is not written in the Torah of Moses, but it was added later by the prophets, then that's explicit enough. Therefore, the judges abrogated such a law. We wouldn't use the mechanism of the special offering. The Gemara answers, it is a case where the judges said it is carrying an object out to the public domain that is prohibited, but carrying an object into the private domain is permitted. And if you wish, say that instead, the judges said it is carrying an object out to the public domain and carrying an object into the private domain that is prohibited, but passing or throwing an object from domain to domain is permitted. Again, these are all prohibited things, but how do we know they're prohibited? Wasn't it from a derivation of our sages included in the oral Torah? And therefore the judges got that wrong. It does trigger the special offering because it's not explicitly written. And the Gemara cites proof against the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, citing Shmuel. We learned in the Mishnah, the judges are liable if they said there is a prohibition against engaging in idol worship written in the Torah. But one who bows to the idol and didn't sacrifice to it is exempt. And the Gemara asks, and why should they be liable in that case? With regard to one who bows to an idol, isn't it written in the Torah explicitly, as it is written, you shall not bow to another god? Explicitly written. And the Gemara answers that the reference is to a case where the judges said when bowing is forbidden is when it represents the typical manner of worship of that idol. But when bowing is not its typical manner of worship, it is permitted. Or if you wish, say instead that the reference is to a case where the judges said with regard to bowing itself, it is when it is performed in its typical manner that it is prohibited. What is the typical manner of bowing? It is bowing that has in its performance extension of the arms and legs, as was practiced in the temple. But bowing that does not have in its performance extension of the arms and legs would be permitted. Again, at what point have we reached a type of ruling that was so ignorant that it violates something that's explicitly written in the Torah versus something that was an interpretation. We're trying to get at that dividing line. Now we're on page 4b, new subject. Apropos the ruling of a court to nullify a mitzvah, Rav Yosef raises a dilemma. If the court issued a ruling that there is no prohibition against plowing on Shabbos, what is the law? Now, what does the Torah say? You can't do work on Shabbos. How do we know what types of work are included in work that is prohibited on Shabbos? The sages have derived, we saw this in Tractate Shabbos, that there's 39 categories of prohibited labor. Where did they get them? Right? These were the types of labor that were necessary to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert, and to produce everything that's included in the tabernacle, right? So plowing would, is something you'd need to do to eventually create bread and the meal offerings that are brought in the tabernacle, or the flax, that was used to make some of the textiles that were used, etc. Right? So plowing is definitely a prohibited labor on Shabbos. But it's not written explicitly in the Torah. You can't plow on Shabbos. So if they said it's permitted, are we going to say that's obvious enough, that it's obvious, it's a totally stupid and mistaken ruling, and they can't and they won't use the special offering? Or are we going to say, well, it's not written explicitly in the Torah, and they're not nullifying the whole mitzvah of no work on Shabbos, they're just nullifying one of the categories. So, does that mean that, therefore, they should have the liability to bring that special offering if they issue such a ruling and the majority of the people rely on it? Let's keep reading. What if they said there is no prohibition against plowing on Shabbos? Then what is the law? So the Gemara explains, do we say that since the judges agree to the application of the entire matter of prohibitions on Shabbos, and their ruling is exclusively with regard to plowing, one of the 39 categories, so its status is tantamount to nullification of a portion of a mitzvah and fulfillment of a portion of the mitzvah, since they agree that the other 38 categories would still be prohibited? Or perhaps since the judges are abolishing the principal category of labor of plowing in its entirety, this is tantamount to abolishing the essence of the mitzvah of Shabbos. So the Gemara suggests, come in here, resolution of the dilemma from the Mishna, which gives as an example of a ruling for which the court is liable to bring an offering, that there is a prohibition against engaging in intercourse with a menstruating woman written in the Torah, but one who engages in intercourse with a woman who observes a clean day for a day that she experiences a discharge is exempt. And why should they be liable in that case? Did the judges abolish the law of a woman who observes a clean day for a day that she experiences a discharge in its entirety? Wasn't that an example of doing away with a whole category? And since we said that they would be liable in that case because they didn't do away with the whole mitzvah of nida, but only with this one aspect of it, therefore, if they abolished the prohibition on plowing on Shabbos, they didn't abolish all of Shabbos, but just a part of it. So apparently, nullification of one category of halacha in a mitzvah is not tantamount to abolition of the essence of the entire mitzvah. And so if they did this erroneous ruling, people relied on it, they should bring the bull offering. But the Gemara rejects this analysis and says, Rav Yosef could say to you, the ruling concerning a woman who observes a clean day for a day that she experiences a discharge is as we stated. As we explained earlier, the reference is not to abolition of the entire halacha of the woman who observes a day for a day, but rather to a case where the judges ruled that the initial stage of intercourse is permitted, right? They reinterpreted a totally different way than what we thought it was. And the Gemara suggests, coming here, resolution of the dilemma from the Mishna, which gives as an example of a ruling for which the court is liable to bring an offering, that if they said, there is a prohibition against performing prohibited labor on Shabbos written in the Torah, but one who carries out objects from the private domain to the public domain is exempt. And why should they be liable in that case? Didn't the judges abolish the law of the principal category of labor of carrying out in its entirety? If we're saying that rises to the level of so obvious, therefore they're exempt, then maybe it would be the same analysis for if they abolish the prohibition on plowing on Shabbos. But the Gemara rejects this analysis too and says that too is, as we explained earlier, that the court rules to nullify only a portion of the labor, for example, throwing or passing an item from domain to domain. But if they ruled out entirely carrying from one to another, that's too obvious and they don't qualify for bringing that offering. And likewise, perhaps, for plowing. So the Gemara suggests, come in here, resolution of the dilemma from the Mishna, which gives us an example of a ruling for which the court is liable to bring an offering, that there is a prohibition against engaging in idol worship, written in the Torah, but one who bows to the idol, but did not sacrifice an offering to it, is exempt. But why should the court be liable in that case? But didn't the judges abolish the law of bowing in its entirety? And the sages say bowing too is, as we explained earlier, that the court rules to nullify only an aspect of bowing, not to abolish the prohibition against bowing in its entirety. So it's like we're seeing that there are categories within mitzvahs that are still so principal and prominent, in our halachas, that if they abolish that, it would be like abolishing the entire mitzvah. Apropos rulings to nullify a mitzvah or part of a mitzvah, Rabbi Zera raises a dilemma. If a court issued a ruling that there is no prohibition against performing prohibited labor on Shabbos during the sabbatical year, then what is the law? Right? Very weird ruling it would be. They're saying, okay, well, Shabbos is still Shabbos, but during the sabbatical year, right, the 7th year in the 7-year cycle when the temple was standing, and there was a Torah sovereign nation in Israel. So then every 7 years, the farmers would not plant, right? They would not plant, and there would be, because we were living at this higher spiritual level, there would have been so much abundance in the 6th year that there would be enough food for everyone to eat in the 7th year, and they didn't have to work. The farmers didn't have to work during the 7th year. They had this wonderful sabbatical year where they could spend a lot more time learning Torah. Now but Shabbos is still Shabbos, right? So they can't plow their field, they can't plant in the field, but there's other kinds of labor that remain prohibited during Shabbos that are permitted during the sabbatical year. You can't plow your field during the sabbatical year, but you can put horseshoes on your horse, right? And nail and do the labor of a blacksmith or the labor of I think they're called a farrier, right? But you can't do that on Shabbos. So what if they said, well, since we're taking the whole year off, the restrictions of Shabbos don't apply during this year? Definitely a wrong ruling, but what would be the result? Would they qualify? Would we use the mechanism of the special offering? So before seeking to resolve that dilemma, the Gemara asks, with regard to what matter did these judges err that resulted in that ruling? Well, they erred with regard to the verse written with regard to Shabbos. In plowing and in harvest you shall rest. Exodus 34:21, which the judges interpreted to mean during a time when there is plowing, i.e. in all the years of the sabbatical cycle other than the sabbatical year, there's a prohibition against performing labor on Shabbos. But during a time when there is no plowing, i.e. during the sabbatical year, then, erroneously, they might say, there is no prohibition against performing labor on Shabbos. So, now the Gemara explains Rabbi Zera's dilemma. Do we say, since one fulfills the mitzvah of Shabbos during the rest of the years of the sabbatical cycle, therefore nullifying Shabbos during the sabbatical year is tantamount to nullification of a portion of the mitzvah, and fulfillment of a portion of the mitzvah, right? Only partial abrogation of the mitzvah. Or perhaps, since the court is abolishing Shabbos entirely during the sabbatical year, it is tantamount to abolishing the entire essence of the mitzvah. So Ravina said, come in here, resolution of the dilemma from a Baraisa. In the case of a prophet who prophesies to abolish a matter of the matters of the Torah, he is deemed a false prophet and is liable to be executed through strangulation. Right? This is somebody who's got the status of a prophet. He's already said something's going to happen, and it happens, and now people have accepted him as a prophet. But then he says, and God told me to tell you that there's no more Shabbos. We know he's lying because we've already been told that no prophet will ever come and tell us to nullify expressly written laws in the Torah. So even though we thought he was a prophet, turns out he's a false prophet, and therefore he's chayav misa, right? He's liable to the death penalty. And that's with regard to any full matters in the Torah. He is deemed a false prophet. But if he prophesies for the nullification of part and the fulfillment of part of a matter in the Torah, Rabbi Shimon says he is exempt from execution, right? So if he says, but on this Shabbos, it will be permitted to do one thing because you need to do this. Maybe it's an emergency, whatever. He's telling us there's an emergency situation. So he's telling us to violate Shabbos, but because of his prophecy, he sees that we're in danger. No one else sees that danger, but he says, you guys gotta draw water from the wells because there's going to be this big fire, and so in order to save life, you need to draw water on this Shabbos, which would otherwise be prohibited. That he's not nullifying Shabbos. He's just saying that this Shabbos we need to do that. He would not be a false prophet, and we would be obligated to follow his command in that situation. Rabbi Shimon says he is exempt from execution. Now, with regard to idolatry, even if he says worship it today and revoke its status tomorrow, right? If he says we have to do any kind of idolatry, any part of a little bit of idolatry, and he's a prophet telling us to do that, then he's immediately a false prophet. Doesn't matter that he's only telling us to violate some portion of the prohibition on idolatry. If he says to do anything that is idolatrous, he's a false prophet. Everyone agrees that he is liable. As with regard to idolatry, even a ruling to nullify part of the mitzvah involves a severe prohibition. And learn from it that in a case where a court issued a ruling that there is no prohibition against performing prohibited labor on Shabbos during a sabbatical year, it is tantamount to nullification of a portion of the mitzvah and fulfillment of a portion of the mitzvah. And the Gemara affirms, indeed, learn from it. They wouldn't actually be abolishing Shabbos. They'd be only abolishing a part of Shabbos, during this once in 7 years. And therefore, they would qualify for that special offering. They would be liable to bring it if they issued such an erroneous ruling and people relied on it. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2 here in chapter 1 of Tractate Horayos. Now we open Mishnah number 3. If the court issued a ruling and one of the judges knew that they erred, and he said to them, "You are mistaken," or if the most distinguished member of the court was not there for that session of the Sanhedrin, or if one of the judges was disqualified from serving as a judge, for example, because he was a convert, or a child born from an incestuous or adulterous relationship, a mamzer who's not allowed to serve as a judge in the Sanhedrin, or a Gibeonite, or an old man who's no longer able to father children. Interesting. Not permitted to be in the Sanhedrin. This court is exempt because they have not rendered a full-fledged ruling, right? Bottom line, if the Sanhedrin issued a ruling that people relied on that was an erroneous ruling, but there was something flawed in the ruling itself, like there were disqualified judges serving in the Sanhedrin at that time, then it's not a ruling. And if it's not a ruling, then even though people relied on it, they don't bring that special offering. And this is derived by means of a verbal analogy. As the word assembly, Eidah, is stated here with regard to a court that issues an erroneous ruling, and if the entire assembly of Israel shall act unwittingly, Leviticus 4:13. And the same word, Eidah, is stated there with regard to the law of one who commits murder unwittingly. And the assembly shall judge between the one who struck and the blood redeemer, right? The avenger of blood. This is the law of the manslaughter and the city of refuge. So just as the term Eidah, assembly, stated there with regard to the manslaughter, right, the unwitting murderer, all the judges must be fit to issue rulings. So too, in the Eidah stated here with regard to the court that issued an erroneous ruling, the court will not be liable for the special offering unless all the judges will be fit to issue rulings. They need it to be a fit court that issued that ruling for it to be an actual ruling. That's Mishnah number 3. Now the Gemara. The Mishnah teaches, or if the most distinguished member of the court was not there, the court is exempt. That's interesting, right? You have to have a quorum of judges. You could have a quorum without the most distinguished one. But what we're saying is the great Sanhedrin, meaning in Jerusalem, needed to have the premier Torah mind of the generation in it. And if he was not present when they issued this erroneous ruling, well, that's why they issued an erroneous ruling, because the most wise and learned of the sages of that generation was not present. And so it doesn't count as a ruling that would trigger that special offering. Or if the most distinguished member of the court was not there, the court is exempt. From where do we derive this law? Rav Sheshes said, and likewise the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, for what reason did the sages say, if the court issued a ruling with regard to a matter with which the Sadducees agree the judges are exempt? It is due to the fact that it was incumbent upon them to learn that law that is written explicitly in the Torah, and they did not learn it. And similarly, in a case where the most distinguished member of the court was not there, the judges are also exempt, as it was incumbent upon them to learn, and they did not learn, right? They could have learned the right outcome, and presumably the most distinguished member of the court had been there, they would have got the right outcome, and he wasn't there. The Mishna teaches Eidah is stated there, and Eidah is stated here, assembly. The court will not be liable unless all the judges will be fit to issue rulings. And the Gemara asks, and there, from where do we derive that all the judges must be fit to issue rulings? And the Gemara answers that this is, as Rav Chisda says, that the verse states in connection with the transfer of the divine spirit from Moses to the elders, right? We saw this in Numbers 11:16, where Moses was going to, it was too much for him, and he needed to share some of this divine spirit with the 70 elders. That's where we get the number of the Sanhedrin, that they may stand there with you. Numbers 11:16. And the term with you is explained to mean with similarity to you, in the sense that they must be fit to issue rulings. And the Gemara challenges this and says, and say that the term with you means that they shall be like Moses, in that they will be fit for the divine presence to rest upon them. Much higher qualification. Rather, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says that it is derived, as the verse states, in the context of the advice that Jethro, gave to Moses. And they shall judge the people at all times, and ease your burden from upon you, and bear it with you. From Exodus 18:22, with you is interpreted to mean similar to you, right? Where Yisro gave Moses the advice that it's too much for you. You're judging, you're handling every case, that every dispute that comes up among 2 million people, you need a court system, right? And there's other judges who will be qualified to handle the simple cases, and only the complicated cases will come up to you. But nevertheless, the judges that will judge the simple cases have to have enough wisdom and righteousness and other qualifications so that they may be judges. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 3. Very short Mishnah. And now we're going to do Mishnah number 4 and its Gemara, which are both very short. We're almost done with class. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Mishnah 4. If the judges of the court issued an erroneous ruling unwittingly, and the entire congregation performed a transgression unwittingly on the basis of their ruling, the court brings a bull. Right? This is the archetypal case that we're talking about here. The judges made an erroneous ruling. The congregation, at least a majority of it, once it's a majority of it, we say that the congregation did this. They relied unwittingly, right? The judges made a mistake. The people relied on the mistake in court. Therefore, they were unwitting in doing this transgression. This is the situation where the members of the court, on behalf of the nation, bring the special offering. They bring the bull, as it is stated in the Torah with regard to an unwitting communal sin offering. But if the court issued the erroneous ruling intentionally, as they knew that their ruling was incorrect, why would they do that? I can't imagine they would ever do that. Maybe they were coerced. Maybe something else was going on. But if they did such a thing, it wouldn't qualify for the bull offering. As they knew that their ruling was incorrect and the congregation performed the transgression unwittingly on the basis of the ruling of the court, then in that situation, each member of the congregation brings a female lamb or a female goat as an individual sin offering. Right? They were all unwittingly sinning because they relied on the court. That's why they bring individual offerings. But the ruling of the court was not an erroneous ruling. It was issued intentionally. That's why we don't, bring the special bull offering that would exempt all the population from bringing individual sin offerings. If the court issued the erroneous ruling unwittingly and the congregation performed the transgression intentionally, i.e., with the knowledge that the ruling of the court was erroneous, then these people are exempt from bringing an offering. Exempt meaning they don't get the opportunity to atone by way of a sin offering because their sin was intentional. They can make atonement other ways, but they don't qualify for bringing the sin offering. And the members of the court don't bring the special bull offering because the people didn't rely on their erroneous ruling unwittingly. They knew. This would be a case where somehow, right, the judges issued the erroneous ruling. Somebody got wise to it and spread the word. This ruling is wrong. What can I tell you? The court got it wrong. We should not be relying on that ruling of the court. And then the people did it anyway. That would be an intentional reliance on an erroneous ruling. And the Gemara says that the Mishna teaches if the court issued the erroneous ruling unwittingly and the people and the congregation performed the transgression intentionally, these people are exempt. And the Gemara infers, but if the person performed the transgression unwittingly in a manner similar to that of an intentional transgression, then the court is liable. And what are the circumstances of that performance? It is a case where the court issued a ruling that forbidden fat is permitted, and the forbidden fat became confused for a person with permitted fat, and he ate the forbidden fat. But the Gemara suggests, if so, let us say, resolve from here that which Rami Bar Chama raises as a dilemma on page 2a of our tractate. With regard to this case, a dilemma that remained unresolved. The Gemara rejects this. Rami Bar Chama could say to you that the dilemma cannot be resolved based on this inference as, due to the fact that the Tana taught the first clause of the Mishnah, if the court issued the erroneous ruling intentionally and the congregation performed the transgression unwittingly, he taught the latter clause employing a similar style, that if the court issued the erroneous ruling unwittingly and the congregation performed the transgression intentionally. But as we said before, in order for the bull offering to apply, both sides have to be unwitting. If you're missing either one of those, it probably won't apply. What's interesting is this case of they erroneously said that something is permitted. The person knew that the ruling was wrong, so that it remained prohibited, but then it got mixed up with something that was permitted, and he ate it that way, so he ended up eating unwittingly, but he didn't rely on the ruling of the court, and yet he ended up eating something unwittingly that they had ruled erroneously on. Do we make the connection then and say if everyone in the country did that the court would bring the bull offering? I don't think we've answered that question. But we have concluded our discussion of Mishnah number 4. Okay, reminder before I take questions, special time for class tomorrow, Sunday and Monday, noon Pacific, not 6 p.m. Pacific like we normally do on Sunday and Monday. But we need to change the schedule because Nina and I are doing Q&As this week. The movie opens 5 days only, Sunday through Thursday. Theaters across America. Here in Southern California, we're doing several Q&As this week. So for sure, Sunday, Monday, and Thursday will be at noon Pacific rather than the regular 6 p.m. time. Tuesday and Wednesday, not sure yet, but we'll announce that, certainly before Tuesday and Wednesday. Okay. Bill, with regard to the difference between somebody who was overseas and didn't hear that the court not only made an erroneous ruling, but then reversed its ruling, versus somebody who was sitting at home and didn't hear it, but he could have heard it. Bill says, so in essence, if he's on the way to the airport, he's already left as far as this law is concerned. Right, that was the practical difference. And Rabbi Akiva would say, yeah, he's already on his journey. That's why he didn't hear about it, so he would be exempt. Yes. Bill also says, incidentally, the Sadducees holding by the broader Tanakh and yet still insisting that they didn't hold by the oral Torah is one of the ways you know that the Sadducees were, to be blunt, not especially concerned with being intellectually consistent. After all, how did they know what books belonged in the canon of the prophets and writings if not because the sages of the generation referred to them. Excellent. Very good, Bill. Very good contradiction. Thank you for that. Yosef, can we say that laws can change form and application, but it doesn't equal abolition? Well, yes. Now, there's something important to remember in all of this, right? We're really talking about the way that these laws were carried out in an earlier period in our history, when the sages were still working out what the laws were. So much of this has already been worked out, right? So much of this has already been worked out. We don't have sages at the level of these sages, right? We had the Tanaim, the sages, the Mishna period. Then we had the Amoraim, the sages, the Gemara period. Then later we went to the Geonim and the Rishonim, and now the Acharonim. And so, we have our Gedolim, the great rabbis in each generation, and they're certainly asked to make rulings on new questions that come up, but they do not have the authority to change, what is basically all the laws codified in the Shulchan Aruch or in the Mishnah Torah of Rambam. So they're not working out kind of like basic laws like this. So it'd be an interesting question, if they made such a ruling now and people relied on it, what it would be. But certainly if they, would we say that if they reverse something that is a clear law, not stated in the Torah, but has been clear for a very long time, I'm not even thinking like what exactly is an example of that. But, in terms of laws of kashrut, that our sages worked out and that we've relied on for 2,000 years, and now a modern rabbi reverses that, again, there's no offerings being brought because the temple is not standing. But will we even say that it qualifies if the temple were standing, where they did something that was so obvious that, it should be like as if they abolished a whole mitzvah. But this is more the types of laws, like when we're studying the laws of, how to bring sacrifices in the temple, we need to understand the law, but the laws of the special bull offering and when it's qualified for that, I don't think can apply in modern times, right? We study it, but I don't think it can apply in modern times. When the Mashiach comes, the third temple goes up, the Sanhedrin is reconstituted, then maybe it could. I imagine it would. And Sharon, can we say someone is observing the sabbatical year? Can we say someone is observing the sabbatical year? Aren't they automatically observing part of Shabbos already and not nullifying all of Shabbos? Since they're observing the sabbatical year, we know, so even if they abolish Shabbos during the sabbatical year, but since they're not doing all the work that year that would normally be doing, very interesting, Sharon, very good, right? So therefore, by definition, they haven't abolished all of Shabbos during that year because the people are refraining from doing all the things that are prohibited by the Shemitah. So therefore, it can't be that all of Shabbos is abrogated. I think that's a very good argument for why they have not abolished the essence of Shabbos. And since it squares with the outcome anyway, because they didn't abolish Shabbos the 6 of the other 7 years, this would be a great alternative or augmenting type of argument, further support. Very good. That's what I've got for us tonight, and with God's help, see you tomorrow, Sunday, special time, noon Pacific. All the best.